What happens when a rock legend sits down expecting an easy, good-natured chat, and instead finds himself ambushed on live television? In under a minute, what began as a light-hearted interview about a successful tour spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable viral moments in loose women history. What was supposed to be a celebration of music and longevity turned into a tense battle of dignity versus provocation, exposing a host more interested in confrontation than conversation. This is the story of how Rod Stewart walked onto the loose, women set expecting professional journalism, and ended up defending his character against a barrage of personal attacks that stunned the audience and fractured the panel. The afternoon had started with charm and ease. Under the bright studio lights, Rod Stewart entered to warm applause, his trademark grin lighting up the room. The crowd's energy was affectionate, the kind reserved for a legend. Dressed sharp as ever, he settled into his seat across from the panel, Denise Welch at the center, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Colleen Nolan, and Janet Street Porter. Everything seemed in order. The cameras rolled, the jokes landed, and Ruth led with kind words about his latest tour and album. Rod laughed, thanked them for having him, and even teased about the London traffic. For a brief moment, it felt like the kind of cozy daytime segment everyone expected. Nostalgic, warm, and effortless. Then, the tone changed. Denise leaned forward, her smile fading into something harder, sharper. "Rod," she began, her voice smooth but cutting. "You're charging quite a lot for tickets on this tour, aren't you? Some people might say you're taking advantage of loyal fans. Fans who've supported you for decades, and now can't afford to see you live. How do you justify that?" The energy in the studio shifted instantly. Ruth's polite smile wavered. Colleen glanced uneasily toward Denise. Rod's expression froze for a split second before he straightened in his chair. "Well," he said carefully, "I wouldn't put it quite that way. The cost of putting on a show these days, the production, the venues, the staff, it all adds up. We make sure it's worth every penny for the fans." Denise smirked. "But you're worth millions, Rod. Don't you think at some point, enough is enough? Do you really need to squeeze more money out of ordinary people who are already struggling to pay their bills?" The audience fell silent. Ruth shifted, visibly uncomfortable. Janet looked down at her notes. Rod exhaled slowly. "I've worked for over 50 years, he said, voice calm but firmer now. "I've earned what I have through hard work. Nobody is forced to come. But they do come because they love the music. That's not exploitation. They come because they love you," Denise shot back. "And you're exploiting that love." The word hung in the air like smoke. Rod's eyes narrowed. He had expected questions, not accusations. "That's a very strong word," he said evenly. "I don't exploit anyone. I give people joy. That's why they come." Ruth stepped in, trying to cool things down. "I think what Denise is trying to say—" "I know exactly what I'm saying," Denise interrupted sharply. She turned back to Rod. "Let's talk about your personal life, shall we? 3 marriages, Rod. Some might say you're not exactly a model of commitment." The audience gasped. Colleen's jaw dropped. Janet looked visibly pained. Rod's composure wavered, just slightly. "That's my private life," he said, his tone darkening. "That's not why I'm here." "Oh, but it is relevant," Denise pressed, her voice rising just a touch. "You've built an image. This lovable rogue, the charming entertainer. But maybe that's just another act. Maybe you're someone who takes what he wants and moves on when bored. With relationships, with money, with—" "Denise, that's enough," Ruth said firmly, cutting across her, voice suddenly authoritative. "Rod is our guest. This isn't appropriate." Rod lifted a hand gently. "No, Ruth," he said quietly. "It's fine." His voice was calm, but behind it was the unmistakable steel of a man who'd been through wars far tougher than this. "Let her finish. Clearly Denise has been waiting to say all this since before I walked out here." Maybe even rehearsed it, the audience murmured. Denise froze for just a beat, caught between defiance and discomfort. And in that brief, charged silence, the power in the room shifted completely. "So," Rod said quietly, his voice edged with disbelief. "Let's hear all of it. What else do you want to accuse me of, Denise? What other crimes have I committed?" Denise smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the tight, victorious grin of someone convinced they were winning. "I'm just asking the questions people at home are thinking," she said smoothly. "The questions your fans might be too polite to ask. Someone needs to hold celebrities accountable. Someone has to stop fawning over fame and start asking the real questions." "No," Colleen interrupted, her voice trembling slightly but full of conviction. "No, Denise, that's not what you're doing." Her Liverpool accent cut through the tense air. "You're not holding anyone accountable. You're being cruel. You're being deliberately cruel. Rod came here in good faith, and you're treating him like he's on trial for something. He's had a career most people dream of, and sure, a complicated personal life. Who hasn't? There's a difference between asking tough questions and tearing someone down." Denise's head snapped toward her, eyes flashing. "Oh, so now you're defending him because he's famous? Because he's charming? That's exactly the problem, Colleen. People like Rod get away with everything because everyone worships them. Nobody ever calls them out. They just smile and let them off the hook." Rod's voice cut through the rising tension, sharp and steady. "Get away with what exactly, Denise? Go on. Spell it out. What have I done?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice rising, not in anger, but in command. "I've paid my taxes every year. Every penny. I've given to charities. I've raised 8 children. I've worked my entire life doing what I love and giving people joy through music. 50 years of it. So tell me, what's the crime? What exactly am I guilty of that justifies this? This public interrogation?" The audience began to murmur, soft at first, then louder. Someone called out, "Leave him alone!" Another person started clapping, and the sound spread. A wave of sympathy rolled through the studio. Denise's composure cracked for the first time. Her smile faltered. The audience wasn't on her side anymore. They were on his. "You're being defensive," she shot back, her voice tight. "If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't do interviews. Maybe you should just stay in your mansion counting your money if you're so sensitive. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, as they say." Rod stood. The movement was sudden, sharp, final. "These aren't tough questions, Denise," he said evenly. "Tough questions are fair, balanced, thoughtful. They challenge ideas, not people. They dig for truth, not headlines. What you're doing isn't journalism. It's cruelty dressed up as courage. You're not trying to find answers. You're trying to make yourself look fearless." He paused, eyes locked on her. "But this isn't bravery. It's ego." The words landed like a thunderclap. The tension was suffocating. Janet Street Porter cleared her throat, her voice low but clear. "I have to say," she began, "Rod has a point. This doesn't feel like an interview anymore. It feels like a trial. And I'm not sure what the charges even are. I've been in this business a long time, and this feels personal." Denise's face flushed deep red. "Oh, so now all of you are against me," she snapped, her voice trembling between anger and panic. "Fine, that's just fine." She turned back to Rod, her tone now cutting and venomous. "Since you're standing there acting so perfect, let me ask you this. How many of those 8 children actually speak to you, Rod? How many would say you were really there for them? How many birthdays did you miss while you were touring, chasing fame and finding your next wife?" The words hit like a slap. The studio fell utterly silent. Even the camera crew froze. The boom mic operator didn't move. Janet's eyes widened. Ruth looked horrified. It was no longer an interview. It wasn't even an argument. It had turned into something darker, something cruel. Rod stood motionless, his face pale but his eyes fierce, glinting with restrained fury and heartbreak. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. The air was heavy, so heavy it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. "That," Rod said quietly, his voice trembling with restrained emotion, "is beyond the pale. Absolutely beyond the pale. You don't know anything about my relationship with my children. You don't know my life beyond what you've read in gossip columns and clickbait headlines. And you certainly don't have the right to stand here and judge me as a father. Nobody does. My children know who I am. They know I love them. And the fact that you'd use them as ammunition in some twisted on-air performance is disgusting." Ruth rose quickly, her chair scraping loudly against the studio floor as she moved toward Rod, hands raised in apology. "Rod, I'm so sorry. This is not how we do things here. This isn't how we treat guests. This isn't what this show is about." Rod shook his head, removing the microphone from his lapel with deliberate precision. "Actually," he said calmly, "it appears this is how you do things. At least when Denise is sitting in that chair." His tone was cold, measured, controlled. "I came here in good faith, to talk about my album, my tour, my music, to share a bit of joy, a bit of life. Instead, I've been insulted, accused of greed, and had my private life dragged through the dirt for cheap entertainment. My marriages, my children, used as weapons for ratings." Denise crossed her arms tightly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, here we go. The big star storms off because someone finally dared to challenge him, because someone didn't bow down to St. Rod Stewart. Poor Rod. Can't handle a few real questions." Rod turned sharply to face her, his composure cracked, not in anger but in disbelief. "Challenge me?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You haven't challenged me, Denise. You've attacked me. There's a difference. A challenge is thoughtful. It seeks understanding, depth, truth. You could have asked me about the stories behind my songs, how I've evolved as an artist, how the music industry's changed. That would have been a challenge. But this?" He gestured toward her. "This was a vendetta dressed up as journalism. It isn't brave. It's bullying." Colleen stood, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "He's absolutely right," she said, turning toward Denise. "You've been out of line from the moment he sat down. You came in here with an agenda and everyone knows it. This wasn't about interviewing him. It was about tearing him down so you could look powerful. But it's backfired, Denise. Everyone can see what you're doing." "I don't have to listen to this," Denise snapped, her tone sharp and defensive. "From either of you. I asked legitimate questions about a public figure who profits off the public. If he can't handle scrutiny, that's on him. Maybe next time he should think twice before stepping into an interview. Gannett Street." Porter shook her head slowly, her voice low but firm. "There's scrutiny," she said. "And then there's what just happened here. I've been in journalism for 40 years. Print, radio, television. I know the difference between accountability and humiliation. This wasn't scrutiny, Denise. This was personal." The audience began to applaud, hesitant at first, then building, rising in strength and volume. The sound filled the studio. Some people even stood, clapping firmly, their faces showing clear disapproval of what had unfolded. The cameras panned across them, rows of viewers united behind Rod Stewart. Rod looked out at the audience, his face softening as he nodded in quiet gratitude. Then he turned back to the panel, his gaze sweeping across Ruth, Colleen, and Janet. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for trying to maintain some dignity in this room, for remembering professionalism even when it wasn't easy. I appreciate that. Truly, finally." His eyes locked with Denise's. His voice dropped low, steady, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "As for you," he said, "I hope whatever point you were trying to make today was worth it. I hope humiliating a guest on live television made you feel powerful or relevant, or whatever it is you were chasing. Because what you really did was damage this show, and your own credibility with it." Denise's lips tightened into a thin line. "You're being dramatic," she muttered. "Playing the victim because you didn't get the easy interview you expected. Not everyone's here to kiss your feet, Rod." "No, Denise," Ruth interjected sharply, her composure cracking for the first time. Enough. Just stop talking. Rod is right. You crossed every line today. Professional, ethical, human. This isn't what loose women is about. This isn't who we are. Rod placed his microphone carefully on the chair, adjusted his jacket, and stood tall. I've been in this business for half a century, he said quietly. I've faced tough critics, rough crowds, brutal reviews, but never have I walked into a place expecting conversation and found myself ambushed for sport. That's a new one. He gave the audience one last nod, then turned and walked off set, leaving behind stunned silence, the echo of applause, and a studio that suddenly felt much, much smaller. That's something special, he murmured, then began walking toward the exit. Slow, steady, composed. His stride carried the weight of quiet conviction. The audience rose to their feet, their applause swelling into a wave of noise that filled the studio. Some whistled. Others shouted words of support. Rod, Colleen called after him, her voice trembling slightly. Please, we're so sorry. This isn't what the show is about. This isn't who we are. He stopped and turned, offering her a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I know, love. I've watched you for years. You've always been fair. But the fact is, his voice grew firmer, she was allowed to do it. She was allowed to sit there and humiliate me. And that says something about this place, doesn't it? About the culture you've built here. Denise leaned back, arms crossed tightly, defiant to the end. Oh, please. Spare me the theatrics. You'll be fine, Rod. This'll probably sell more tickets for your overpriced tour. You'll thank me later. The reaction was instant. A chorus of boos erupted from the crowd, deep and sustained. It was raw, visceral. For the first time in the show's long history, one of its own hosts was being openly booed by the audience. Ruth looked stunned. Janet covered her mouth in disbelief. Colleen shook her head, mortified. Rod paused near the exit, the light catching his silver hair, his profile etched against the stage backdrop. He looked weary but dignified. A man who'd been provoked, who'd stood his ground, and who'd chosen grace over rage. You know the real shame? He said at last, his raspy voice echoing in the hushed studio. I actually liked this show. I thought it'd be fun. Bit of banter, a laugh, maybe a cheeky story or two. But you, Denise, you made it ugly. You turned something joyful into something mean. And for what? Denise didn't reply. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. For the first time, her armor cracked. And what showed beneath it wasn't confidence, but doubt. Rod took a slow breath. You didn't expose anything. You didn't reveal a scandal or a truth. All you did was show everyone that sometimes bullies wear microphones and call it journalism. That cruelty can dress itself up as courage. The studio erupted. Applause, cheers, shouts of, "Well said!" ringing through the air. The energy had completely shifted. What began as an ambush had become a reckoning. The audience was united, the panel divided, and Denise Welch sat motionless, absorbing the fallout of her own performance. Ruth stood quickly and crossed the set toward Rod. Please, on behalf of all of us, I am so deeply sorry. This is not who we are, and this should never have happened. Rod nodded gently. I appreciate that, Ruth, I really do. But it did happen. And it happened because someone thought this was okay. Maybe nothing changes. But at least everyone watching saw it for what it was. He glanced back once more. Denise was staring down at her hands now, her face flushed, her colleagues visibly recoiling. Colleen's eyes were glassy with tears. Janet couldn't bring herself to look at her. You deserve better than this, Colleen said softly. You really do. Rod smiled faintly. Can't win 'em all, but the people who've supported me all these years, they know who I am. That's what matters. Not this circus. Janet nodded. You're absolutely right. And I'm ashamed of what's happened here. The cameras followed as Rod Stewart made his final exit, the audience still on their feet, applauding, many visibly moved. Behind him, the remaining panel sat in uneasy silence, 3 women looking anywhere but at the 4th. Denise Welch sat rigid, alone, surrounded by the echo of applause that wasn't for her. Ruth finally turned back to the camera, her voice tight with emotion. We need to take a break," she said softly. "We'll be right back after this." But as the red light on the camera faded, the truth settled over the studio like a weight. Something had shifted. This wasn't just an awkward interview. It was a moment that would change how guests were treated, how hosts behaved, how the show was remembered. Rod Stewart had walked on expecting respect. He had endured cruelty with grace, and he had walked away showing everyone watching exactly who the real problem was.